Nathan, you wanna go? Hit, good shot. Low left, I think, but I think that's still a good hold. Hit, bottom part of target. Right side. Hit. Good hit, left side.
You hit the small plate.
Good morning, everyone. This is John with Gun Deals, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Primary Arms GLX 2.5 to 10. But before we get into the video, if you don't know, Gun Deals is a website that will provide you with links to some of the best products and prices in the industry. Now, very importantly, they don't buy or sell anything. Once again, they only provide you with links and point you in the right direction. So if you like saving money on cool stuff, whatever that may be in the firearm accessory industry, go ahead and check them out. Once again, that is gun.deals. Now that that's out of the way, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, as all that sort of stuff is very helpful in the YouTube algorithm. And go ahead and comment something funny down below. Now, with all of that out of the way, full disclosure on the Primary Arms GLX 2.5 to 10 is that this was actually sent out to me personally by Dat at Primary Arms. He's their social media manager, or their, social media relations manager, or what have you. I don't forget his exact job title. Anyways, he sent this scope out to me for review. So I'm doing a video for it on the Gun Deals channel, and then eventually at a later point in time, I'll do one on my personal channel as well. So of course, the scope and the mount that we're going to be talking about today were sent out by Primary Arms, and I did not pay for them whatsoever. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the specifications on this PA GLX 2.5 to 10. Now, this is, of course, the Primary Arms GLX 2.5 to 10 by 44 first focal plane rifle scope. This one specifically comes with the ACSS-GRIFFIN-MIL reticle. We'll get into the reticle a little bit later on, but it is specifically the one that I requested for some nice attributes that it has at mid-range. Now, the base magnification, 2.5 to 10, first focal plane, that is going to be a very good magnification range in sort of that mid-range environment, say in between 100 and say 700 yards. You're going to be able to get a lot of performance out of this scope. Body itself is a singular piece of 6061 T6 aluminum. The overall length and weight on the optic is 12.5 inches and just over 22 ounces, which for kind of a special purpose rifle scope, if you will, is not that bad. It's definitely not a heavyweight. There are a lot heavier optics on the market, and I feel that the 2.5 to 10 does do a good job. And again, those kind of mid-range environments. Now, for those of you who don't know, Primary Arms has 3 different optic lines. Basically, they have their SLX, which is their silver series. They have their GLX, which is their gold line, which is what this optic is. But then they have their top tier platinum line, which is their PLX. Now, the SLX, almost all of those are manufactured in China. The GLX, is manufactured in the Philippines for the most part, and then the PLX is usually Japanese glass, which is of course going to be the highest quality. Now, the main selling point for me on this optic is a combination of things. So you have the GLX glass, which is going to be a lot better than your budget tier scopes. Basically anything under $500 is all going to have the same sort of quality of Chinese glass, which is decent quality and can definitely get the job done. But when you step up to the Philippines and to Japanese glass, especially on the top end, you get a lot more crisp, a lot more clarity of glass, and you're going to get, a better picture, especially when you're looking at extended distances. So this being a more mid-range focus scope, something that I personally am going to be using between 200 and 600 yards, and possibly out to 700 yards. Though again, this is definitely more of a mid-range, not quite a long-range application scope. And this one here also has extremely nice turrets. So these are steel-on-steel locking turrets. So they have a detent that you press down to rotate, and then of course they will lock in place so that they don't accidentally rotate on you. Now getting into the controls on the scope itself, we of course have our magnification ring, which is very nicely knurled, and it actually has this fin, which is not quite an extended throw lever, but it is definitely a raised ridge, and it's actually removable if you don't like it, and you can actually move it around to a few different spots to kind of make it work the best for you, whether you're right or left-handed, or again, where you like to have it set on the magnification ring itself. The machining work is done quite well. It is very smooth. It has the right amount of force. It is definitely not difficult, but it does, again, have that little bit of resistance to it. We do, of course, have our windage and elevation, which are, again, very nice clicks. You do, of course, have these are 0 resettable, as well as they also have a 0 stop, I believe. So when you rotate this one here all the way down, it will actually stop in place, and you get like a 1/2 mil underneath your 0 stop if you ever needed to dial under for any reason. The windage is, again, also the same. Feels very, very nice. On the left-hand side of the scope body, we have our illumination dial, which goes from, I believe, 1 to 10, which is just fine. The illumination on maximum is very dim during the daylight, but you don't need it during the day. The reticle is definitely large enough to do its job without illumination, and it's there for that, dusk or nighttime application where you actually need it. Now, very nicely on the GLX line of scopes, this one in particular has the AutoLive technology. So that means even if I were to leave this on 10, its maximum brightness, after a certain amount of time of not moving, the illumination itself will actually turn off. Now, battery life on, large style optics like this usually is very poor. It's not like LED based emitters on red dots. Usually you're looking at something like 20 to 200 hours, again, depending on the optic. But on this one here, with the AutoLive technology, it's going to extend that out. So instead of dying after, say, 6, 7, 8 hours out on the range in real world circumstances, if you're not moving and shooting with it the entire time, it's going to help to save and extend that battery life. And again, battery life on this style of optic is generally very poor. Now, on the inside ring of that, we actually have our focus or our parallax adjustment, which goes from all the way down from 25 yards all the way out to infinity. Now, with a 10x top end magnification on the scope, you could definitely take it out further than 600 yards. Like I've said, you could take it out to 700, 800, 900, 1,000 yards, no problem. For me personally, though, at those extended distances, I would like to have more magnification. So now, this scope fits very perfectly for where I live if I needed something that was able to stretch out a little bit further. I live in Western Washington, where it is very hard to concoct a shot longer than 700 yards. In fact, when we took this out shooting a couple days ago, 700 yards was the furthest I had ever shot up until that point. So while this is definitely doable, and on man-sized targets, it's not going to be too hard. When we're starting to talk about reduced size targets at extended distances, 700, 800, 900 yards, it is going to start to fall behind certain other reticles and other scopes that just have higher magnification. Now, again, for me personally, inside of that 600 yard zone, this is a very, very good performer. Now, getting into the reticle and the glass, because of course those two things are going to be very, very important in how well they work together. The glass itself is crisp, it's clear, it's bright. It's definitely a step up from your average Chinese glass, which is nice. It's a nice thing to see. It's not the best glass I've ever seen, but it is definitely very good and very usable. And again, at those extended distances, 400, 500, 600 yards in mixed lighting conditions, having better glass in the GLX line of optics is going to be more beneficial than if you're using cheaper Chinese glass. So even if you have a cheaper, say 4-16, you have more top end magnification, but it's less crisp, it's more fuzzy, it doesn't quite cut through the same way, different lighting conditions and whatnot. The glass on here can actually provide you a good benefit, even though, again, you don't have that huge top-end magnification. Now, again, the glass isn't like phenomenal, but it is, again, very good and a step up from other more budget-tiered scopes. Because, again, this scope, if you don't know, comes in at around $750, which is not what I personally consider a cheap scope. Some people might consider this a cheap scope. I definitely don't. For me, a budget mid-range scope is anywhere from like $250 to $500, and this is definitely a step up in terms of price and fortunately in terms of features as well.
Yeah.
Ooh, nice.
Can't tell where you hit, but you hit.
Another one, yeah?
Yep, another one.
Now, getting into eye relief and eye box on the scope itself, this is something that they kind of underrate. They claim it only has 2.7 to 2.8 inches of eye relief, and that is not quite accurate. On 10x magnification, I would say it has much closer to about 3 inches of eye relief, and then on 2.5, you can stretch it out quite a bit. So depending on your magnification that you're at, you're going to be getting somewhere between 2.5 and 4 inches of usable eye relief, which is going to be very forgiving, especially in like an AR-15 platform with an adjustable stock. It's going to be more than forgiving enough. Eye box is a little bit tight, but that's just kind of par for the course here. It's not going to be like a LPVO on 1X. It's going to be a little bit tighter than that, of course. But again, it's still definitely usable. We were shooting it, again, about 600 yards plus in some circumstances from odd positions braced off of stumps, and we were still able to make use of the scope just fine. How's it?
Yeah, the lower portion of it.
Okay. Now, one area where this scope is definitely lacking for me, and I am going to knock it for, is in the field of view. The field of view at the low end at 2.5x magnification is only 35 feet, which is pretty poor. That's worse than a lot of 3 and some 4x optics. So the field of view, which is very important when we're talking about a magnified optic, the field of view is very diminutive. And that's going to translate as well as when you get up to a higher magnification. At 10x, you only have 10 feet of field of view at 100 yards. And again, that's getting very, very tight. So I like field of view, especially on magnified optics, because when I'm at that higher magnification, I want to get more of that image, basically. So I would like to see more of that magnified image, because of course that's what I'm using a magnified scope for. And if I can see more at any given magnification, I'm going to be able to take in more information on my surroundings while being inside of the glass. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely still usable, but it is what I consider to be subpar. Now, getting into the reticle, this is of course a first focal plane reticle. This is the ACSS-GRIFFIN-MIL reticle. This works extremely well with that 2.5 to 10 first focal plane optic design. And so we'll go ahead and get into it because there is a lot of stuff going on inside of the reticle. So at first glance, at 2.5x magnification, we have what looks to be a 2/3 horseshoe design, which helps to, be fast for acquisition and to draw our eye to the center. And then in the center, of course, we have a very fine, very precise chevron reticle, which is kind of a feature of all of the ACSS reticles. And at the lower magnification settings, it does just that. It works very well as a quick acquisition reticle and is still precise enough to take shots at longer distances without having to try to fumble and dial up on the magnification. Now, when we do dial up to our higher magnifications, of course, we expose more of what's going on with the reticle, and there is quite a bit here. So we still have a very precise center chevron reticle, which if you use the tip for dialing with the very nice turrets that are here on the GLX optic, you still get a very crisp, a very precise aiming point, again, if you're planning on dialing. If you're not planning on dialing, we have a very nice 1x1 mil grid. Now, a mil, if you're not familiar with mils versus MOA, I believe every mil is equivalent to 3.18 MOA. So think of it like a 3x3 MOA grid if you're used to thinking in MOA. Now, the mil grid is very important for me for spotting misses at longer distances. Basically, say I dial up to a target at, say, an unknown distance. I think it's 500 and it's actually 600 yards. I pull the trigger and I spot the impact bottom right in the mil grid. I can just use that mil grid wherever it happened to land within that mil grid and use that spot on the reticle to adjust a target for a very quick follow-up shot. Now, that's in an ideal circumstance where you are actually able to spot your misses. In the real world, it's often a lot more difficult to spot where your round actually went if you miss the target. Now, another advantage of having a mil grid style of reticle is that you don't have to dial at all. If you know your distance and you know your drop and the wind call, you can very easily translate that into the mil grid. Now, the mil grid itself is not crazy precise. It is a 1x1 mil grid. So at, say, smaller targets at extended distances, say like a 10-inch plate at 600 or 700 yards, it's not going to be precise enough in that mil grid to precisely put it exactly where you want it. So you're still going to be doing some holds and some Kentucky windage within the mil grid itself, but it does still give you a very good reference point. And again, if we're shooting at larger targets, man-sized targets, if you will, that 1x1 mil grid reticle works very, very well out to 600, 700, 800 yards. Again, if you're doing more PRS style of shooting, where it's smaller targets at very extended distances, 1, 2 MOA targets at extended distances, that's where this less precise mil grid, where it's definitely less busy than other reticles, but it is also a little bit less precise as well, it can be a little bit harder to use again on smaller targets at extended distances. Now, fortunately, the reticle still has a few more tricks up its sleeve, if you will. The center stadia line also works as a ranging feature, so it has shoulder height ranging out to 800 yards. And then on either side of the horseshoe, you have both horizontal and vertical ranging out to 800 yards on man-sized targets. On top of that, the center chevron itself is also a ranging feature. I believe that should slot perfectly in between the human shoulders at 100 yards or 200 yards, I believe. And then you can, of course, range off of that at further distances as well. But if they fill up half their chevron, then it's 200 or 400 yards, so on and so forth. Now, on either side of the center chevron, you also have mover holds. Now, I believe those are set up for 8 miles an hour, which is what the average soldier runs with full kit on. Full speed is about 8 miles an hour at 100 yards. And I'm sure you could extrapolate that to other speeds and distances as well if you are a much more talented marksman than I am. Basically, the reticle gives you enough precision, again, especially more than enough in that sort of mid-range envelope, out to say 600 or 700 yards on full-size targets. And it also gives you a ton of ranging features, fast acquisition features, as well as precision features if you like to dial and use the very tip of that center chevron. Now, generally speaking, with this reticle, the way that I was using it was I was basically at extended distances, I would dial a little bit and then use the mil grid underneath of the chevron, usually because at extended distances, say like 600 yards, the chevron would cover up most of the target. So say if I shot center mass on the steel so I could see the bottom or the top half of the steel because I put the tip of the chevron in the center, if I impacted low left or low right, I wouldn't be able to see that impact because the chevron itself was covering it up. So usually at extended distances, again, you don't have to do it this way, but that is how I chose to run it. Usually at extended distances, what I would do is use the mil grid itself because it's a lot crisper, it's a lot cleaner, and it's a lot easier to spot your misses because, of course, you don't have that center chevron covering up a good bit of your target and the surrounding area as well at extended distances. So overall, you do have an excellent feature set within the optic and reticle. It's not going to be ideal for everyone in everyone's situation. This is not what I consider to be a long-range optic. Again, if you're looking for extended distances, maybe say between 600 and 1200 yards, then there are definitely higher magnification scopes that I would recommend over the 2.5 to 10. This is a scope that really excels, at least for me, in that sort of 100 to 600 yard range where it is a good blend of speed, precision, all of the ranging features you could ever want. And then it also has that mil grid, which I do prefer as a more precision-based or more sort of DMR-based optic, something that allows me to make quick follow-up shots and adjustments on the fly without having to do too much work, and I can kind of use the reticle to my advantage. Now again, when it comes to actually using the optic, it has good glass, it has a really good reticle, and so again, inside of that 400, 500, 600 yards, it was incredibly easy to make repeat shots over and over again, even though I am not a very experienced shooter at those extended distances. Again, 600 yards is about the furthest that I've ever shot, and this optic performed quite well even in the hands of a novice like me at those, again, extended distances, at least for me. For a better shooter, I'm sure it will perform better, as better shooters tend to make everything that they use much better. Now, before we end the video, I should also note that the optic mount that we're using is the Primary Arms PLX scope mount. It is their brand new, made in the USA scope mount. It is very high quality, and it's also $300, which is horrifically overpriced. Please don't buy it. It is way overpriced for what it is. It is a very nice scope mount, but there are nicer scope mounts for less money with nicer features. So while it is a very nice scope mount, and I'm grateful that they sent it out to me, I don't recommend that you buy it because it is very, very overpriced. Again, I think it's like $300 for a fairly standard 30mm scope mount. And yeah, there's not really anything special about it. So with all of that out of the way, guys, I hope you all enjoyed. I am a big fan of the GLX 2.5 to 10. I'm going to continue to shoot it and use it, and I think that it is an excellent sort of mid-range scope, if you will. Let me know what you guys think of this scope down below, if there's anything else that I should compare it against. And with all of that out of the way, guys, I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Peace off.